name is Chella Ramanan. I'm a freelance games journalist. I mostly write for GameIndustry.com, and I'm a co-host Argue the Toss, which is a gaming podcast. And welcome to the Minority in a Minority panel. Let me introduce the panel, or they'll introduce themselves one by one. So, Tanya, take it.
Is it on? Oh, it's on? Now just turn it off. Testing. Oh, there we go. Hello. So I am Tanya. I am the owner of Digital Jam. I'm going to tell you something very, very briefly about myself because I think it's relevant in the context of this panel. So I was born in Hong Kong. I was orphaned at birth. I was adopted by British parents who were in the British Armed Forces. My parents are Caucasian, and therefore I have grown up as a British citizen with a Caucasian attitude. Thought I should give you some context.
Hello, I'm Sitara Shefta. I'm a producer from Sumo Digital. I am British. I was British born, but both my parents are Pakistani, so I just thought it was relevant to bring that up as well.
Hello. Hi, my name's Anisa. I'm a UI artist, and I was born and bred in Malaysia, and I came to the UK 7 years ago, and my parents are incredible English speakers, so I was born bilingual, which is why I get a lot of, "Your English is so good" comments. So thanks for that.
Hi, I'm Kish Hirani. I'm chair of Baymin Games, which I guess fits one of the minority, but I'm not the other minority, which is Latina. Since everybody's saying where they were born, I think it's the first time I'm going to get to say this because I'm super proud of it. So I was born in Kenya, and I speak fluent Swahili, but nobody else does. So speak several languages. I moved to Britain when I was a teenager, went to university straight, and then after masters, entered the video games industry. So this is going to tell my age as well. So I've been in video games industry for 20 years now, and here I am.
Thank you. And since we're doing backgrounds, I am half Grenadian, half white British. Any Grenadians in the house? No, no. Okay, so the panel we're going to be exploring the issue of ethnic diversity in games, particularly being a woman and a minority in the industry. We're going to take a look at the state of the industry when it comes to diversity and discuss some of our personal experiences of working in the industry. So I'm going to kick us off with some of the latest figures from Creative Skill Sets Employment Census, which was in 2015. And BAME, which stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic People working in the games industry, is unfortunately down from 4.7% to 4%. If you compare this to other creative industries, they have actually increased from to 6.6% from 5.4%. If we look at women in games, so the total of 19% of women in games came up from 14%, although we have to take the caveat that Anne presented this morning. And across all creative industries, women account for 36% of people employed in other creative industries. So the games industry is going in the wrong direction, and we need to take a look at why, perhaps, what are the barriers. So yeah, I thought I'd ask the panel, what are the barriers for BAME talent wanting to enter the industry, and do you have any personal experiences of hurdles you've had to overcome, or go, somebody.
Nobody's going to have the first say. Come on, Kish.
I'm not going to start as a male and then suddenly it was pointed out to be starting. I'll emphasize just on those figures. In fact, one of the, David is the founder of BAME as well as Women in Games. Key factor was, as everybody, when you give figures, they'll say, well, there's margin of errors, and 4.7 to 4 is not a big number. So me, what was important is if you relate it to other figures, and as well as in women in games, etc., there's always been a growth. So 4 to 4.7, it's, although it should say it's pretty much similar, there's no growth, and that was very obvious. There's no growth in ethnic minority in the industry. So that was, to me, a very convincing figure, which I would, should be taken seriously. And so, sorry, I'm probably end up getting back to the question, why is that the case? I don't think there's an obvious answer. I'd probably more say it's, to me, the opportunities of getting in the industry are a lot easier now, and that's just a natural progression of things where things trickle through. So that's my loose sort of justification of, I think it definitely will get better, or absolutely will get better, because that's one of the goals of our Gaming Game advocacy group as well. So I hope it's more, let's say, get better, but again, open to the flow. Why? That's your question. Why is the case?
I'm going to leap in here and say that for me, getting into this industry, I don't recall any Asian women in a senior management position that I could look up to and say, that's who I want to be like. And that is an issue for young girls who are considering taking options in school or college or wherever it is, and saying, this is what I want to do, is being able to look at other people who look like them, who are a representation of them and their culture, to be able to say, this is something I can plausibly do. So there is a certain degree of cultural kind of lack of support for BAME to necessarily be able to get into this industry. And I think it's important to remember that we do need role models and we do need examples, and it doesn't matter how far you are in your career, you're in this industry, and that makes you a role model to somebody else who's trying to get into this industry. Just remember that.
Any other takers on that?
When I first started in the games industry, I had only one lady who was a mentor of sorts, and she was white as Snow White with platinum blonde hair, but she was a lady, that was my only mentor or someone I could look up to, and she wasn't in my company at the time for very long either. And ever since, all my bosses, all my upper management people has always been men, and it's always a little bit difficult, especially being both ethnic minority, and I'm also Muslim, so there's that extra layer of no one to look up to, and also becoming like the only source of information when it comes to my ethnic background and religious background.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the easiest way for me to answer this question is to think about, even prior to joining the industry, why I ended up going to university and studying games development when I went to university. It was an interesting conversation when I think that early on, because my family, for instance, were all really shocked that I wanted to go and study games development. They were all very supportive, but nobody really understood that actually there's a job here and there is something very real that you can go and do here. How does games development work? I mean, I think that's a problem, generally across the industry anyway. That's something we need to feed into our education system. But I think that that it's more of a problem in some particular cultures, because I don't see a lot of Asian females myself playing games, and then when I go out into Asian communities, people are often quite surprised when they say, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I say, "I make games," and they say, "What does that mean?" That's often a question that's raised quite a lot by Pakistani communities, Indian communities, Bangladeshi communities that I go to, and I speak to people there, and it's also sometimes accompanied by, "Oh, you're an Asian female. Asian females make games." It's like, yes, we do, but there's a minority of us. And then, the good responses and positive responses I get are, "Oh, my daughter would love to talk to you and come and learn about what you do because she loves playing video games." And it's like, it's about us going and educating people and saying, actually, going into those communities and saying, this is something we need to talk about. We have lots of girls, we have lots of young boys who are from these backgrounds and actually probably would want to have a career in something like this, but they don't know it's an option. If I'm to look at stereotypes, in my community in particular, it's often, oh, getting a career as a doctor, getting a career as a solicitor, that's the thing that people automatically assume is a career. It's like games development, it's a career, you just don't know about it yet.
I have to say, having an Afro-Caribbean family, I mean, all my cousins are lawyers and they're like the Huxtables from the Cosby Show, basically, sort of middle-class Black Americans, and I'm just the weird one that writes about games or something. I don't know. So yeah, I can identify with that as there being a sort of cultural hurdle that we're coming from, perhaps sometimes.
I think that's the problem with everybody here in the room, irrelevant of your ethnic background. When people say you're in games, when are you going to get a real job? And then eventually they see you making games and associate. And I think I would say the most amazing things happening in the industry right now is things like Candy Crush and Pokemon Go, etc., which is getting the mass market more aware of this is serious business, and not just mass market consumers also, Wall Street, etc., looking at numbers of how much these games are selling. Not every game will be that successful, but it's as a profession and as individuals, it's becoming so much easier now. Not that I've ever needed to justify why I'm in video games, but I think it helps a lot of people who are just naturally introvert, shy, etc., trying to get in. And then in addition to that, I think, as all of you echoed, being ethnic minority, I mean, my grandfather always would say, yeah, when are you going to get a real job? And effectively, until he passed away, he didn't know what exactly I did. And majority of my family, immediate family, as soon as you say, in video games, so what do you do in video games? Do you test games? It's like, no. Actually, at Sony, I was head of developer services, I've managed engineers, etc. Oh, our kid's computer is broken. Would you be able to have a look at that? And that's typically how it ends up being.
Yeah. So what are your experiences? What is the working environment like as ethnic minority, as a female minority?
I'm happy to start with that one.
Okay.
I think which characters are in the game. Oh, all 6 of our characters are Caucasian. Has anybody considered having an Asian character? Has anybody considered having, an Afro-Caribbean character? And that's conversations that, when you raise those questions, it creates a little bit of awkwardness in the room, not tension, awkwardness, because it's something that people generally don't consider. And I think the more growth there is of ethnic minorities within the industry, that will slowly start to decrease, because there'll be more people bringing up those questions, and there'll be more people who actually work there and say, hey, why don't I have a character that looks like me? Why can't I play as me in the game?
Yeah, yeah, it's completely. Anybody else want to touch on that one?
Right. I had maybe 3 companies where I was kind of the token foreigner or token girl at one point, where all of them were boys. And I'm not going to say that they're going to ask me, oh, what's it like being a girl? But, there's a lot of things that I do from day to day which is a bit culturally different. And the biggest thing every year is that we've got Ramadan, where I do fast for 30 days, and sometimes I'm very into it, the question I get every year is like, not even water? It's like, no. And it comes from a place of concern where they're scared that, I might faint or something. And I'm like, I've been doing this since I was 7 years old. It's fine, guys. But it does come to a point where I'm the only source of information when it comes to Islam and things like that. And
okay, so in terms of developing minority characters, do you think development teams are afraid of getting it wrong and they just avoid it, and that's why we're not represented?
In my experience, to be brutally honest, I don't think they're even considering it. I don't think it's even a consideration. And I don't know how many of you guys know Kate Edwards over at the IGDA, but her work at Microsoft and what she's been doing over the years in terms of culturalization within games is such a new thing. And people don't really understand what this is all about and why we would need to do these things. But actually, I think realistically, a lot of development teams aren't thinking about this until after the fact, after they've done the development process, and they bring somebody like Kate in to look at it and kind of review it and kind of go, ooh, actually. And I do think it is.
These barn doors.
I think just to add to that, I think the industry start making more progress with obviously adding more female characters into games. I think that's something we are starting to see improve, that you have an option of a male and a female, or sometimes you have more female protagonists in games. And I'm hoping, that we do start to expand upon ethnic minorities and different colour skin, different colour races, start seeing that in games as an option. The one thing that excited me, and it's not exactly a character, but when the Wii came out, you could make a me. And I remember thinking, oh wow, you can pick exactly, and I can make this me look like me. And it's a really small thing, but it's things like that as they start to develop, and hopefully as they start to see different communities, different people from different backgrounds playing those games, it's hopefully something we'll start bringing into games more often as well. And it's about people like everybody that's sat in this room raising those questions, saying, hey, why don't we have a character who has a different colour skin? Why don't we have a character who is from a different part of the world? And it's about us bringing that in, because we're the developers in this room that should be doing that.
Yeah, I was the only person among my friends who made a me that looked like me, because I guess they look like them all the time in games. You know? I just thought, that's weird, maybe I'm an egotist. Yeah, sorry.
I was just saying that there is a surgence of ethnically diverse characters, but they're still in like NPCs, they're still side characters. Like the most recent game that I found ladies in hijabs were actually in this Japanese JRPG called Bravely Default. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. So in the second game, Default, well, Bravely Second, they have a desert area, and the innkeepers and the shopkeepers were all hijabis. They were wearing hijabs, and it was so cute. And I think that was the first time I noticed a hijabi lady in a game. I'm sure there's a lot more examples, hopefully, I don't know, but I'm not aware of them. So I tweeted the picture instantly. I was like, oh my God, these girls are so cute, they're wearing hijabs. And I do hope that someday we'll find it in the character creation section, where the characters that you create could wear a hijab if they want to or not, you know? And aside from the skin color thing, obviously. But yeah, so right now we're getting a bit more recognition, but still in the NPC area, not yet main character. So hopefully we can kind of progress forward to that.
Given I think most of your developers have been in development, and typically what's happened and still continues to is a lot of these factors of especially addressing skin colors, your avatars, etc. So it's always thrown in at the end. So it's a typical sort of project management. This is the game proposal, this is the game design, etc. And it's usually the last 6 months or something. Then somebody realizes, hey, how about you're customizing characters? We need to add lots more skins, different colors of hairs, etc. And then I think there was somewhere where it just says, I think somebody just, although it was misread, I don't think it's lead to where exactly I'm getting to. It's not complex making different hairs, etc. for a programmer, artist, etc. So it's just a matter of it's usually left or right towards the end. So that's why it's rushed. And then the problem with that is when somebody reviews, they use that as an excuse of saying, well, it seems like they can't model ethnic minority hair or women in different ways, etc. But I think I'm hoping it's going to be very difficult to make it more interactive. But assuming everybody in development, would you sort of agree it's just left in every company you work for at the last minute with this sort of things? They're never a priority, never from day one. Is that sort of the thing? I don't know. Yeah.
Anyone? Are you alive out there? So did anyone in development here? I suppose there's lots of, has that been your experience, that these kinds of things are left to the last minute? Yeah, there's someone.
So it's been a while since I've worked on a game that had actual human characters in it, but I can think we did eventually decide to diversify our cast. We initially had two characters, a man and a woman, they're both white, and someone said, we want more characters because this is going to be a multiplayer game now. We eventually decided that halfway through development, let's make this a multiplayer game. Let's make our characters diverse. And this made it awkward because everyone on the team was white. And we were like, well, we have to be kind of careful about this, right? We kind of stray into stereotypes. We came up with the end that was like, a white woman's a white man, another two white dudes, a black woman and a black man, an Asian woman and an Asian man. It was a great lineup. And I was really happy with it. But if no one had just said, like, why don't we diversify a little bit? It wouldn't have happened because it was never considered from the start. And it happens so much. It happens the same with having favorite female characters. No one really thinks about it, it becomes an afterthought, and an afterthought has become, oh, this is way too expensive, it's going to take too much time, so it just gets thrown out.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about these things much earlier than we do.
You just need to ask the question, what if, I suppose. So,
I'll just
sorry.
add to that and say that sometimes artists are amazing for providing a bit of variety, maybe when you're not immediately thinking about it when should be. Sometimes it can just be a kick up the arse to think, oh yeah, my artist is providing me with 5 characters from different nationalities. I could use all of them or none of them. It's up to, sometimes the artist can help.
Yeah.
And,
I just want to add to this as well, though. In my observations, and the many studios I've worked in over a very long career, one of the things I do note is that when you are going to raise this discussion around ethnicity in characters or culturalization within game, it tends to end up coming from somebody who's of an ethnic minority. And the thing is that to a certain extent, it can end up looking a little bit like we're being defensive. Like we're saying, oi, what about us? And actually, it shouldn't have to come from us. It shouldn't have to be us that necessarily points this out. It could come from somebody else who's maybe not of an ethnic minority, but it tends to end up being us because naturally this is our life and this is something that we, live with all of the time. But it would be great if we could shift that balance a little bit.
I mean, just to add to that, just to what you're saying, the way I try and think about it and the way I try and explain it to people is, if you went outside in London now, or even look around this room, there's people from all sorts of different backgrounds and all sorts of different cultures. So when you imagine a world, how do you imagine the characters? Like, nobody looks the same, right? So try and visualize everybody differently, and then base your game development on that, and that's probably the way for all of us to be thinking. And it hopefully means that it won't just be coming from the minorities, and it'll be coming from everyone as well.
Okay, so I suppose we've sort of answered why diversity matters. We want different voices. Lots of people have answered that question throughout the day. But what is the industry doing to change things? What can we do? What are we doing moving forward so that next year we're not having this same conversation, the conversation's moved forward? If you ask me back.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to be the vice chair of Bayman Game, and that man over there is the chair of Bayman Game. So I'm going to let him explain all about Bayman Game.
Wow, okay. Give you an opportunity to talk. So one of the full credit to David who set this up. In fact, let me just go back on when David approached me, and in fact when we came along, I was the first one, probably the only one maybe. I made it really hard for him by saying, "But David, I need to be reminded I'm brown or from ethnic minority because I don't look at myself that way." So I was being like probably the wrong person to be chairing or even being on the board or being in a meeting to start off with, because that's how we started this off in March, just about 6 months ago or so. And in fact, that's credit to him. He said, "You're sort of the person I want to be in this advocacy group as well," because I think, and personally, I think majority of us are that way. We never sit in a meeting and the first thing you look at is how many other pigmentation of colors are in this room. So we're game developers, and that's how it comes about to be. So in fact, and 100%, one of the reasons I volunteered, and then David convinced me to chair it as well, or I convinced myself where we was that I want this to be more positive, more what positive effect does it have to have diversity? And I think one of the keys, as far as gamers goes, irrelevant of which country people are playing games, so it's a very diverse population. And in fact, up till whatever age you'd say, majority of the kids are playing games, not just video games, any games or so. Every single kid would play games, and nowadays, lucky for all of us here, video games seems to be the most exciting games kids can play also. And then what happens afterwards, after that, when they're choosing their career? We talked about a couple of other factors which are involved, being ethnic minority or so, but I think the whole idea of the advocacy group was to one, we don't know the answers yet fully. I mean, most of the things are very obvious of why things are wrong and needs a change, and I think that's how far we've got to right now, that we think there is a need to set up this group. And I think so I'm quite comfortable being at that position rather than making a lot of assumptions of I know why this is the case, etc. And just one finally before I let go of the mic, this was very important to me, which is what I told David as well when we were setting this up, is I don't want the ethnic minority group or Bayman Games to be ethnic minority representing themselves in advocacy group and encouraging, because everybody, in fact, I won't tell you to put your hands up if you don't think it's a good cause, but I'm pretty sure everybody here, irrelevant of your ethnic background or what pigmentation of your skin, you are concerned about not having equality, irrelevant of gender, ethnic background, whatever else. So it has to be inclusive of everybody. So in fact, that's one of the things when I put out a statement or so was I want every single person in the video games industry to join this group. It's not a group just for ethnic minority.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the reason for something like Bayman Game isn't to be, I think the phrase that was used in the original meeting was a whining group, but because inclusivity of conversation is fundamental to making change happen. And in order for inclusivity to happen, people need to understand how to identify or recognize where they go to in order to connect with these communities. And Bayman Game is a great way for people to be able to connect to these communities and understand where they can find people of ethnic minority and communicate with them and understand what's going on for them and how to, open that dialogue. But if we don't have a representation, it's kind of like, going back to what I said about when I first got into this industry and there was nobody that I could look to and say, there is an example of somebody who I can be like or who is similar to me. We need to be able to at least give people a connection point to that so that they understand where they can come to for conversation.
Yeah. How are we for time? Yeah, we've got to wrap it up. Anybody want any final thoughts on what we can do, what maybe these developers, what these lovely people out here can do going forth from the conference?
I think it's the case of, even to the recruitment teams here, HR people, and people that generally are looking for people to employ and get into the industry, encourage people. I think that's the main thing, especially with the communities that aren't aware that this is a career option. Go and talk to those people and say, hey, I make games. This is something you can do too. And it's like what you said, it's about having a role model. And if we can go into those communities and say, actually, this is an option, and maybe even from an early age, because I think it is about not just educating the children, it's about educating the parents as well, because some of them have come from a cultural background where they don't expect games development to be a career option. If we can go and educate those people, then hopefully that means there will be more people from lots of different backgrounds who will want to come and work in the games industry, and ultimately that's a great thing for the industry and will provide us lots of benefits as well.
Yeah, the number one reason people say we don't hire ethnic minorities or women is because we don't have enough applicants, and that boils down to the younger generation who don't know it's a thing, and especially a lot of people who go like, isn't that like a white boy thing to do? Ooh, I shouldn't say that. Sorry. But just to put yourself out there. I think all of us are putting ourselves out there to show that we exist and we want more of you, and the younger people could be like us, hopefully.
I think I'll take it from a different angle of my last few words in terms of everything they've said. Most amazing thing on people, but from game design. Again, I've never been a games designer, but I think one of the changes you guys can definitely do is, and I think every single person in this room in games development can help, is make sure every game you're working on, as simple as the NPC characters or so, just randomly name them into, there's so many amazing names, name them Anil, whatever else, so don't name them Kish, it's actually a nickname, it's not an Indian name as such or so, but just, there's so many, in fact it makes it more exciting, and actually this is not something I thought of straight away. I was at BAFTA on Monday and I was talking to a venture capitalist, and there's a racing game, he couldn't tell me the name of what game it is, and he said, usually I'm very detached and we look at deliverables and things coming through. And so this racing game came along and I noticed all the characters, non-player characters, main player characters or so, were just names of females as well as people I just wouldn't recognize, or if I've probably seen a certain movie where there was an Asian person or an African person or so, or typical African name from Kenya or wherever else or so. There were just random names on there. And what was interesting is they said they're just placeholders. They said, well, why are they placeholders? Leave them as that. That's amazing. And they were straight away noticed. And again, I think that's a very simple thing to do. Just put lots of random names you can pick up. From Wikipedia, wherever else, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think I write fiction as well, and I think it's just you just have to think about it. You just have to stop and ask yourself the what if question. And it might be hard because you might not be from that group, or you might need to do some research, but sometimes the hard things are worth doing. And
so I would close with one final question, which is, by show of hands in the room, how many of you are in this games industry because you're passionate about games? Out of interest. Okay. So hypothetically, hypothetically, you're in this industry because you have a passion for games, you have an ambition, and you have dreams. And I would ask you to judge everybody that you interact with, both from a development perspective, but also from a creation perspective. When you're creating these games and these visions, you're creating dreams for people to step into and play and engage with these dreams. And judge people by the size of their dreams and the scope of their dreams rather than the colour of their skin, is all I would ask.